Hello. For about a week, things were pretty quiet around the world. Some people called it the calm before the storm. Now that the Israel-Iran war has started, you could say they were right. Well, maybe it was just a coincidence. But it's safe to say that this strike was, more or less, predicted. I've said many times that London dreams of organizing a big war in the Middle East. And, judging by what happened, this was exactly the first step in that direction. It's worth noting that the strike was carried out skillfully. But there's a fundamental principle here. Any hunter knows that you have to finish off a serious animal. Apparently, Israel didn't have enough resources to finish it off completely right away. Maybe they were counting on being able to spark a revolution inside Iran. But in this case, their expectations, didn't really pan out. By the way, it's worth noting that in any Eastern country, regular changes in leadership usually do a lot of good. Maybe that's not entirely true for Iran, though it definitely is for the Arabs, but in this particular case, I wouldn't rule out that the effectiveness of Iran's armed forces and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps will actually increase as a result of the events that took place. Once again, this isn't a statement, it's just a supposition. Still, the blow dealt was a serious one. I'm not sure that Iran's nuclear programs have been destroyed. And as for the killing of nuclear scientists, I believe that's definitely not acceptable. I mean, that's terrorism. Let's face the truth. And Iran's response was also quite harsh, since one Iranian reactor, at least its above-ground facilities, was bombed and there was even some radiation. So, from the Eastern perspective, it was absolutely necessary to bomb some reactor in Israel in return. There is information that Iran struck at a reactor in the Negev Desert and a nuclear facility in Israel. The results are still unknown. I think we'll see something soon. Now, let's move on to some philosophical conclusions. First, Trump's support for the Israeli operation is most likely a mistake for him. First of all, because this will seriously damage his relationship, I think it's already damaged, with the Arab world. Yes, the Arabs don't like Iran. And if Iran, as a player or actor in the region, had actually been wiped out, maybe they wouldn't have objected too much. But what happened is just completely unacceptable. By the way, I've thought about this topic, and not just me, but a number of experts as well, that if Russia were forced to carry out a nuclear strike, it shouldn't be against the United States, but against the United Kingdom. Because in that case, the American elites, specifically the American ones, would put on a show of outrage, but deep down they'd be rubbing their hands together, thinking, well, thank God, finally someone managed to do it. And here, the situation is pretty much the same. Since they didn't finish the job, the entire Islamic world is supposed to be terribly outraged, and, to be honest, quite frightened, because it's absolutely obvious to everyone that this Israeli operation was carried out with significant involvement from the fifth column in Iran. And I'll say it again, the goal was, at least I'm deeply convinced of this, and based on the ultimatums that Netanyahu put forward and what Trump said, it's absolutely clear that this was an appeal to certain, in their view, progressive forces in Iran who were supposed to overthrow the Ayatollah's regime. But apparently, it didn't work out. I'm not going to. I'm not an expert on Iran or the Middle East, so I won't speculate about why it didn't work out. I'll just stick to drawing conclusions. So, I'm deeply convinced that Israel did not expect such a strong response. That's just my impression. If I'm asked to provide any arguments, well, I've shared some of them in a closed Telegram channel chat. You can check there. There are some videos and a few comments. But honestly, all of that is pretty subjective and shouldn't be taken as absolute truth. But, and here, I think, is where it becomes fundamentally important. I get the feeling that if Israel were offered some kind of mediation for peace with Iran right now, they would agree. The other thing is, maybe today Iran wouldn't agree, but from a common sense perspective, first of all, we need to figure out what's going on with the reactor in the Negev desert. And secondly, again from a common sense perspective, Iran would need to conduct a nuclear bomb test, after which there would be no more questions. Well, let's see how things develop. One thing is clear. In this situation, the mediator could only be either Russia or, in some scenarios, China. But I think there is no need to rush, because, well, haste just isn't appropriate here. So, what was the result? As expected, oil prices have jumped. By the way, they've reached exactly the levels that Trump likes. He prefers somewhere around 75 to 80, simply because that's the price point where shale oil production in the United States becomes self-sustaining. And, naturally, gold prices have also gone up. But honestly, as far as I know, I haven't checked the latest numbers. It hasn't reached its peak yet. But if this continues, it will get there. In general, in the current situation, both Iran and Israel could really use some good advice, because for Iran, it's clear what to do. Wait for information about the reactor in the Negev desert and prepare for nuclear bomb tests. But what should Israel do? It's already absolutely clear that if Iran wants to bomb the chemical plants in Haifa and, accordingly, energy facilities, it will do so. Israel, of course, has acted like it would do the same in Iran, and maybe it will. But Iran is a big country, and Israel is small. For this reason, there are some nuances here. Let's see. I think that today and tomorrow will be very interesting days in this regard, especially from a diplomatic standpoint, as is usually the case. The diplomacy will be behind closed doors, but because decisions will have to be made, I think by Monday everything will come out. It should be noted that this sense that something should happen has not affected the macroeconomic indicators in any way. This morning, another macroeconomic review from the Khazin Foundation was released, and overall, the strategic line of the structural crisis continues in full force. And, generally speaking, there are no significant deviations. Overall, I believe that Russia has finally brought its strategy of moving into a passive stance to its logical conclusion, to use the words of Andrei Petrovich Devyatov, and, in the current situation, should be getting the maximum possible benefit from it, because it's absolutely clear that against the backdrop of a potential nuclear conflict between Israel and Iran, the whole story in Ukraine, which, frankly, everyone is sick of, has been pushed to the background, if not to the third tier of importance. And without a doubt, Trump needs to become more active, and in a constructive way, because the American elites, some might say they're bought by Israel or, by Jews, well, they were on Israel's side. But, on the other hand, the general public hasn't been very happy with Israel's policies in this situation. Well, first of all, because, honestly, everyone understands perfectly well, why aren't there truckloads of drones already driving down the highways of the United States? Where's the guarantee that there aren't any? and Pandora's box has been opened. But there are still a whole bunch of other nuances. For example, similar operations by Israel and Iran and by Ukrainian special services in Russia attacking strategic airfields, air bases for strategic aviation. But here, since I'm not an expert, I won't comment on that. Overall, I can say this, things will settle down a bit by Monday. And the key questions are Iran's nuclear tests and the condition of the reactor in the Negev desert. These are the two main things that will most likely determine the outcome, and they are the primary factors you should pay close attention to when making your decision. The further development of events. One thing I can say, and I'll repeat it again, this is my strong feeling, neither side wants things to escalate, but they can't say that out loud. Well, we'll keep our finger on the pulse. I think that very soon, it won't be possible to have such long breaks between commentary on current events, at least for the next week. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.